Welcome everyone to my native trial garden. I have lots of things to discuss today in the video. The main topic is going to be planting and establishing your native wildflowers in your yards. I have been discussing different factors of native production on my Substack these past couple of weeks, and I thought that the planting and establishing was one of those things that you just needed to see it done. So that's why on this Unearth Horticulture episode, we are going to hone in on that. Just to briefly discuss what I'm planting in the trial garden today, I've got some Liatris spicata that I'm working on. I've got some Prairie larkspur. I've got some purple coneflower, some Prairie parsley, and I also have, retivita, which is an upright coneflower, not typically what most people think of when they think coneflower. They're thinking of that purple coneflower. And then also I have some various prairie clovers that I'm also going to throw in. They're super beneficial for our bee population, our honeybee population, among other Lepidoptera. So I've got purple prairie clover, white prairie clover, and then the round-headed prairie clover. And I've got more that I am on the hunt for seeds in the prairie. It's one of those that's just so sweet that the cattle like to graze it first. So it's been a little bit harder to come by some of the less populous species. So let's talk planting. Okay, so I gave you a bird's eye view so you could really see what I'm doing here in this video. I've got some Liatris here that I am going to plant and establish in this section of the garden. I wanted you to take note of the weeds that are currently here. I have been weeding for days for the last 2 weeks. And just a note, when you have a native garden, a lot of people think they look weedy. And I talked about this in my Substack article last week, so you can go back and take a look at that if you want to see more on that topic. But the main thing to think about when you are establishing and planting natives early in the season, like in May time, which is perfect, like the earliest you want to start planting perennials is really May, because the soil's warmed up and your perennials are finally starting to shake dormancy and come up out of the ground. Our prairie really does not come to life until May. In fact, it's fully green now, but I'd say that's new as of the last week to 2 weeks. So May 1st is really the earliest you want to start planting. And even then, some of our late season natives aren't coming up out of the ground until later, until mid-May. So paying attention to where you've planted things in the past, being able to identify a native versus what's a weed is so important when you're native gardening, because although yes, natives will fill out and clump together and really start to choke out any competitor weeds, until that point, it is your job to choke out other competitor weeds. You do it for your plants. It's part of the culture of a native garden, part of the horticulture of growing wild. So that's just something to think about. I am going to get this weeded before we start this planting. So, all right, gonna do that. Just a note on mulch here, I am using cedar mulch. The main reason is that it really webs together nicely. It doesn't blow away in Kansas. And using 2 inches of mulch with our clay soils is more than adequate. The rule is usually 2 to 4 inches depending on your soil drainage. And because I have such heavy clays, and most of us do in this neck of the woods, 2 inches is a-okay. It keeps your ground cool, it keeps moisture retained, it helps prevent weeds. There's lots of benefits to mulch. So yes, I do use it in my native garden. I use it in all of my gardens. So let's dig some holes. Just a note on tool selection when you are planting plants in general, no matter if it's perennials or tomatoes or whatever you're digging. It's so important to have the right tool, and everybody's gonna like a different tool for a different reason. I wanted to show you what I use and kind of go from there. For raised bed planting, I like to use a shorter handled tool because I am standing lower and the raised bed is raised. But it's always important to choose a shovel for digging that's appropriate. Flat edge shovels are really used for edging. they're not really used for digging. So try to find a shovel with a head, and then make sure it's sharpened. Make sure it's clean and sharpened, and that will make your job so much easier, especially with hard, dense clays. I like a larger head to get the job done quicker, but you can also, for precision, use something like this, a long-handled spade, little trowel. It's got a really nice sharp edge on it. I like to use that when I'm digging in between other plants, so it's not as disruptive. Hand trowels are a-okay too, but it's really hard to dig while sitting. I'm just gonna say that. And so I like things with longer handles so I can stand up and dig. And though these might not be exactly appropriate for this job, I had them out. I would have probably chosen a longer handled shovel to do this job, since I am digging straight into the ground and not into a raised bed. But alas, here we are. So just to dig the holes, whenever you dig a hole for whatever you're planting, you want to dig it exactly the depth that you want to plant it, and maybe 2 to 3 inches wider, so you've got some loose fill to backfill into the hole. If you dig it deeper, the problem with that is you plant your plant and then the root ball has a habit of sinking. Now, this is worse for trees than it is for annuals and perennials, but I always like, why dig a hole deeper than you need to dig it? So that is what I'm going to do here. So I've got the holes dug. You have your choice. You definitely can add some nutrients into the soil if you want, depending on how poor your soil is. But I'm just gonna tell you, natives are one of those plants, you really don't have to add nutrients into the ground because they are native to the soil that we're planting here in Kansas. So that's one of the benefits of planting native plants, is you don't really have to do soil amendments. So I'm not gonna add any nutrients to the soil. We're gonna just pop these babies out, and we're gonna take a look and see what their roots look like. See how good a job I did with them in production. And you can see they're really rooted to the ground. I wouldn't call them root bound in any stretch of the imagination because their topsoil is still really loose, but they're ready to go in the ground. So next step, we're just gonna plant them. You want to plant them level with their the level of the pot. You really don't want to plant too deep. That's really key, because you can deal with some crown rot, especially when you're dealing with clay soils. Now, like I said, natives are so much more forgiving on a lot of our environmental conditions that are less than adequate for other types of perennials. So the benefit of using natives, they go on and on and on. So again, great roots. Check out those roots. When you buy natives from anywhere, whether that's the Plant Bus or any other local grower, just keep in mind, natives are supremely hard to grow in nursery plastics. I mean, it is the most challenging thing I've ever grown in production. So you're not going to want to have to do that yourself for very long. So make sure that you plan to, when you purchase your natives, to go home and plant them pretty right away so that you don't have to struggle with growing them in containers. Because believe me, I wouldn't wish that on any home gardener. It's quite the challenge. You could deal with crown rot, you can deal with pests, you can deal with them actually drying out in their containers before you can get them planted. Even though they are drought tolerant upon establishment, natives, before they're established in their soil, in the ground, they are not drought tolerant. So making sure that you get them planted ASAP as soon as you purchase them is key. All right, last one, best one. Looking good. So I have this Liatris planted. The next step to do is to mulch and water. And on that note, let's talk about watering. Watering is so important in a perennial's first year, whether it's native or not. Even though perennials have nice root systems that allows them to be a little bit more forgiving on whether you remember to water them one day or not, in a plant's first year of establishment, because most of their roots are still in that initial growing medium in their small root ball, they haven't tapped into your native soil yet. They're going to be a lot more likely to die from drying out. So in order to make sure that your natives are established and make it through the whole summer and the next year, and then you're going to be good to go, you need to come out regularly in the mornings. I recommend at least every other day, and just stick your finger down in the soil. Does it feel dry? Can you get your finger in the soil? Is it so hard and dense so that's how dry it is? Just make sure that you're watching your plants, keeping an eye on them in their first year of establishment. Even no matter what you're establishing, whether it's a tree or native perennials, anything, it's always that initial first couple of months at least that are so important to keep an eye on them. So I am going to mulch around these, and I'm going to water, and I'm going to plant the rest of my trial natives today, listen to the birds, and just really enjoy myself out here. If you have any questions, make sure you drop them in the comments below. I don't think I'm forgetting anything, but you may have thought of something that I forgot to address. So until next time, you've been watching Unearth Horticulture.